So as we move into Year of Prophecy for Destiny 2, we've heard a lot about changes that Bungie are going to be making to expansion content. Of course, we'll get 2 significant pieces of content in the form of expansions every year. The first one is Edge of Fate in July. Just last week, we did a significant breakdown of all of the things that we know about that new content, and pretty big system changes coming to Destiny 2. But as we know in the long term, equally important is how Bungie continue to update the game, deliver seasonal content and updates through the year. And so in the video today, we're going to focus a little more on everything that we currently know about that, the roadmap that Bungie have broken down, but also specifically their approach and the types of content that we're going to see, with some new details which have been outlined recently. And that will include new seasonal activities, exotic missions, but also important playlist updates, raid challenge updates, as well as events and content drops that we'll get frequently, with changes to how Bungie feature existing content in the game. Plus they talk about what that will mean for the things that they introduce over the course of the next year in terms of vaulting and accessibility for that content. So as we head into this significant shakeup, right here we've got a much more in-depth look at how that's going to work. So the Bungie dev said, progressing through the Fate Saga is going to be more meaningful with 2 expansions a year, and we've been talking about how focusing our seasons on the core hobby of Destiny and that commitment to continually updating it. But in addition, we're going to have 2 free major updates between each of the major expansions for Year of Prophecy and beyond. And so ultimately that means that 4 big beats of content will happen each year, 2 expansions and 2 free major updates. And so what that means is that we're not doing paid seasonal content anymore. They also add that they're not doing separate seasonal storylines, and this also means we're not going to build a bunch of activity content that basically just goes away and is less meaningful in the game after 3 months. So we're focusing all of that effort that used to go there instead into building up the core hobby of the game, and the hope is that that stays fresh and exciting. Plus it also ultimately means there are no more paywalls for seasonal content. And of course, on top of the content rollout, another important thing to highlight here is that it seems that vaulting content will not be standard practice based on what Bungie have said, and Game Rant interpret it this way as well. They say one of the core frustrations that players have had with Destiny 2 is how little time a lot of its best content has been around for. They give the example of the Coil, one of Destiny 2's most popular activities, only being in the game for 6 months before being sunset when the final shape dropped. And now that that old content model is gone, Bungie have promised that content will not be removed following the launch of a new expansion. So obviously content will maintain its value in terms of actually sticking around in the game. Also, I guess FOMO plays into this to some extent as well. Theoretically, there will be less of it overall, at least in terms of the major bits of content each year. But in terms of the scope of seasonal content, seasons will be different to what we've had recently, as they'll essentially last for 6 months, but they'll roll out in different stages. So when we look at the roadmap, alongside Edge of Fate, we get the season called Reclamation, and when that first drops, it'll include content which is free, but also a paid rewards pass. And then around 3 months later, there'll be a major update to the season, which brings a new activity, which again is free, but then an additional reward pass that can be purchased. However, that is optional. So Bungie are breaking these components up a little more. And in terms of update scope, Bungie have described these drops as something similar to Into the Light sized updates. Of course, we think about Onslaught in Into the Light, but there were other components to it. So looking at the first major update, Ash and Iron, Bungie have confirmed that we'll return to the Plaguelands, which is going to be cool in itself, and that'll be inside of a new activity called Reclaim. But it would also feature a brand new exotic mission, new types of pinnacle ops being added, all of which will be free, and there will additionally be new weapons and gear, as well as 2 exotic weapons. One of them will come via the rewards pass, again that's a paid thing, but the other, which will be the free exotic, will be dropping from the new exotic mission. It also means that Destiny 2 will be receiving essentially more free content on an annual basis than we've ever had in the past. But Bungie will also rework and reuse content that we've had before. So looking at the new Pinnacle Ops component, Bungie has said major updates will include additions in the core playlists, which change the focus activities and rewards. Previously, Bungie referenced activities like the Coil returning in these playlists, so for example, it may be that the Coil is also featured again during Ash and Iron, perhaps with things like weapon updates, and in that way, Bungie want to keep some of the popular content relevant and cycle certain activities back in on a seasonal basis. So another possible example, not confirmed by Bungie, but it could be things like the Nether from Heresy being re-added at some point. Again, it isn't specifically confirmed yet, but this is what Bungie are indicating with what they're saying. And these playlist updates will basically run alongside the brand new activity content such as Reclaim, which will be in the Plaguelands. So those are some of the aspects of these seasonal updates, but there'll be a little more to major updates as well, including in Ash and Iron that will get a raid challenge update. So Bungie have said when this challenge update drops, it'll add new rewards as well as mechanics, feats, and potentially even new encounters. This update will kick off with a raid race event and be a venue for experienced raiders to further challenge their skills. Plus they add, in addition to the highest tiers of raid rewards being available from these challenge challenges, new and exclusive rewards will be added as well, and that will include new weapons and a catalyst for the raid's exotic. So as well as adding new content, that kind of means that this raid for Edge of Fate essentially will be dropping in different stages. So we'll basically get the standard versions of the raid initially, but it will later be expanded on and give us the first opportunity to get the highest tiers of rewards from that raid as well as new items. So it's certainly a different approach, and it's another very endgame component of these major updates. Another example they gave is a return to a Pantheon-style event, which they refer to as a RAD event. So in the fourth major update of the year, which will be dropping in March of 2026, they'll be planning for another event that introduces novelty and allows our team to experiment with legacy raid and dungeon offerings to create surprising aspirational challenges. And so it may be moving forward that Bungie stick with a plan like this, where we get an initial raid update 3 months after the first drop, and then a few months after that, an event which is kind of in the vein of Pantheon, or maybe even along the lines of Rite of the Nine at some point in the future again. So some of the things that we've seen Bungie experiment with, like Pantheon, Rite of the Nine, and Into the Light, will inform a big part of their approach moving forward for free seasonal content. But beyond this, of course, seasons will introduce new types of event. One example that Bungie have already trialed is heavy metal, so that includes the new event home system, rewards path, challenges, and things like titles, and Bungie are going to be doing a lot more of this moving forward. Another which Bungie will introduce is Arms Week, and they've said this will be a week-long event, first dropping in early August of 2025, so I think it's going to be 3 or 4 weeks after the launch of Edge of Fate, but it will be a recurring event. We don't really know the frequency yet, but probably at least once or twice a season. And they've said it will focus on one weapon archetype each time it returns, with new legendary weapon featured alongside special volatile mods available during the event, which apply sort of sandbox and performance twists for the featured weapon. Plus they add that there'll be focusing options for each weapon, which will also have a holofoil version available through all tiers, and they indicated that we'll be able to grind for a tier 5 version of these weapons for events, which is part of the new tiered loot system, and there'll be specific objectives or challenges which create that loot rarity chase. So in that way we'll be able to get the fully upgradable versions of these guns, and alongside Arms Week, they've said the shooting range will arrive for the first time. So this is a new range in the tower, we can spawn all kinds of different enemies in, it's also available for multiple players, and it'll be able to display individual weapon damage for each player, so you could take a full raid team in there and see who can do the most DPS, for example. But once the shooting range is added, it will be a permanent addition to the game, so it's not going to go away with Arms Week, but Bungie will instead use that event as a platform to kind of first introduce it. Plus they add, for all events moving forward, they'll include special holofoil weapons, so there'll be a holofoil solstice weapon with this cool sort of ocean style animation that you can see there. Again, holofoils will be available across all different tiers of weapons, and for Solstice in particular, they indicated that there will be a specific chase for the tier 5 Solstice weapon, as well as some twists on that summer event. So there are some pretty big new components that Bungie will introduce in terms of seasonal free content for Destiny. At the same time, some of it is along the lines of what we've seen in the past, but safe to say on paper at least, it sounds like a fairly significant rework to the overall content approach, and ultimately this is what we know about season-styled content for Year of Prophecy and beyond. As we know with Destiny content, we never really know how it will pan out until we get to play it. Of course, marketing and the things that Bungie say ahead of time only really give us a baseline idea of what to expect, but I definitely think there is a lot of potential to support the game in this way, both in terms of introducing new stuff, but also keeping existing content and some of the more popular activities and rewards more relevant in the game. So that is what we know for now. Of course, we'll be getting more details in the months to come, so keep it locked and loaded here, but for the moment, give us your thoughts in the comment section. Are you excited for this new content rollout? In addition to all of this, of course, we will be getting the much bigger expansion drops that'll happen twice a year too, so let me know what you think. If you've enjoyed this breakdown though, a rating below really does help us out, and if you want to keep up to date with everything related to the game, get subscribed and hit the notification bell so I can keep you posted. Otherwise though, thank you for watching, and I hope you guys have an awesome day.